You got up this morning, maybe from the couch, maybe from bed, and for just a moment, there it was. That heaviness in your legs, that slight unsteadiness, the sense that something that used to be effortless now requires a little more effort than it should. You might have noticed it on the stairs, or when getting out of the car, or after a walk that used to feel fine but now leaves your legs feeling like they belong to someone older than you. And you probably did what most people do. You told yourself it was just age. You told yourself this was normal, that legs just get weaker and that is simply how it goes. But here is what I want you to hear clearly before we go any further. Leg weakness after 60 is not always what it appears to be. It is not always an inevitable, unstoppable decline. For a significant number of people, what they are experiencing as normal aging is actually the result of specific, identifiable, and in many cases, addressable factors that most people never think to look at and that most doctors do not have time to discuss in a 15-minute appointment. Today, we are going to go through the hidden reasons your legs may be feeling weaker than they should. Not just one reason, but several, because the reality is that these factors often stack on top of each other, and at the very end of this video, we are going to cover the one factor that surprises people most, the one that research points to as one of the most significant and overlooked contributors to leg weakness in older adults, and the one that almost everyone mistakes for an inevitable part of getting older. So stay with me. This is a video worth watching from start to finish. Welcome to Longevity Insight. If you are new here, this channel exists to bring you real, research-backed information about aging well, not wishful thinking, not marketing, just what the science actually says. If you are not yet subscribed, now is the moment. Hit that subscribe button and join a community of people who are choosing to take their health seriously. We release a new video every week, and this community keeps growing because the information is genuinely useful. Subscribe, and let's get into this. Let's start with the numbers because they are sobering and they are real. Population-based estimates show that muscle mass begins declining around age 30 at roughly 1% per year, but the rate of strength loss is even faster, approximately 3% per year after age 60. That means strength is declining 3 times faster than mass, which tells us that something beyond simple muscle size is at work. A 2024 review published in the International Journal of Molecular Sciences confirmed that sarcopenia, the progressive age-related loss of muscle mass and strength, does not occur suddenly. It has been building silently for decades before it becomes clinically obvious in the 6th or 7th decade of life. The consequences are not trivial. Untreated sarcopenia carries a 60 to 89% higher fall risk in older adults, a 71 to 84% increased fracture probability, and substantially elevated rates of hospitalization and functional decline. A 2025 meta-analysis covering studies through December 2024 found that nearly 30% of community-dwelling older adults are affected by frailty or sarcopenia, and the burden falls hardest on men. A 2024 global research effort analyzing data from over 250,000 people found specific biological mechanisms that push some people toward muscle weakness while protecting others, with inflammation and certain blood biomarkers sharing causal pathways with sarcopenia. But here is the thing that the statistics do not fully capture. Not everyone who has weaker legs at 65 is suffering from advanced sarcopenia. Many people are experiencing weakness that goes beyond simple muscle loss weakness, driven by factors that compound the muscle issue and often go completely unidentified. Let's walk through them. The first hidden factor is a loss of the nerve-to-muscle signal, and this is something most people have never heard of. Here is a foundational fact. Your muscles do not contract on their own. Every single muscle movement, every step, every push-up from a chair, every time you hold your balance depends on a signal traveling from your brain, down your spinal cord, through motor neurons, across a tiny structure called a neuromuscular junction, and into the muscle fiber. That connection has to work reliably for the muscle to fire properly. What research has consistently found is that aging does not just reduce muscle mass, it degrades this nerve-to-muscle communication system. Motor neurons, the nerve cells that command muscle fibers, are lost with aging. A 2025 review published in Frontiers in Aging confirmed that motor neuron loss begins around age 50 and contributes significantly to muscle fiber atrophy. As motor neurons are lost, the fibers they controlled become what researchers call orphaned. They can no longer receive the signal to contract, and they begin to atrophy, even when the overall muscle appears intact. The brain and spinal cord also become less effective at sending powerful, coordinated drive to the muscles. Research on elderly patients with weak legs found significant disabilities in a nervous system that hindered the activation of leg extensors, with the cause not simply being weak muscles, but the nervous system failing to fully recruit what muscle was there. This means that some of what people experience as leg weakness is actually their nervous system becoming less effective at using the muscle they still have. This distinction matters enormously for practical reasons. It explains why resistance exercise, particularly the kind that requires genuine effort and challenges the neuromuscular system, is more effective than simply trying to be more active. Walking is good, but the kind of movement that genuinely challenges the nerve-to-muscle pathway is what preserves and partially restores the connection. Research on exercise and neuromuscular junction integrity has found that endurance training can partially restore the motor unit number that would otherwise decline with age. The muscle needs to be challenged to maintain its neural connections. A body kept mostly still loses those connections faster. The second hidden factor is poor circulation in the lower limbs, and this one is more common than most people realize and more commonly confused with aging. When blood flow to the legs is reduced, muscles do not receive adequate oxygen. When muscles are oxygen deprived, they fatigue faster and feel heavier with less effort. Walking becomes harder than it should be. The legs feel tired after activities that should not cause tiredness. And in more pronounced cases, there is that characteristic cramping or aching in the calves during walking that improves with rest, a symptom doctors call intermittent claudication, and which is one of the hallmark signs of peripheral arterial disease. Peripheral arterial disease, or PAD, primarily affects adults after age 50 and becomes increasingly prevalent in the 60s and 70s. A 2025 update to StatPearls confirmed that reduced arterial perfusion in the legs is commonly referred to as poor circulation, and that many patients with PAD have either no symptoms or symptoms that do not strictly match the textbook description, meaning they experience leg weakness, fatigue, and heaviness rather than classic pain, and these get attributed to aging rather than vascular issues. What most people do not know is that a sedentary lifestyle is itself one of the contributing factors to leg vascular disease. Research published in a detailed review of prolonged sitting and leg vasculopathy found that excessive sitting subjects the arteries of the lower extremities to chronically reduced blood flow and shear stress, a pro-atherogenic environment that over years damages the endothelium of the leg vessels. The researchers concluded that for many people who spend the majority of their waking hours seated, this repeated exposure to reduced leg vascular shear stress perturbs the vessel lining and renders the lower limb vasculature vulnerable to disease. In other words, sitting too much is not just a general cardiovascular risk. It specifically and progressively damages the blood vessels in your legs. The first practical step is awareness. If your legs feel heavy, tired, or crampy during or after moderate activity, this is worth discussing with a physician. It may be nothing, but it may also be something addressable, and catching it early matters. The third hidden factor is vitamin D deficiency, and the link to leg strength is more direct than most people appreciate. Vitamin D is not just a bone nutrient. It has a direct role in muscle physiology. There are vitamin D receptors in skeletal muscle tissue, and when those receptors are activated by adequate vitamin D levels, they influence protein synthesis in muscle cells, support calcium metabolism essential for muscle contraction, and contribute to neuromuscular coordination. When vitamin D levels are low, all of those functions are impaired. A 2025 study published in Nutrients, analyzing over 3,900 participants, found that older men with vitamin D deficiency had significantly higher odds of low muscle mass, 1.82 times higher, and significantly higher odds of sarcopenia, 2.30 times higher, compared to those with adequate vitamin D levels. A separate 2025 study in Frontiers in Endocrinology focused on hip fracture risk found that vitamin D deficiency was associated with impaired muscle function, and that this muscle impairment was itself a mediating factor in fracture risk. In other words, vitamin D affects leg strength, and weaker legs lead to falls and fractures. The challenge is that vitamin D deficiency is extraordinarily common in older adults. Research has found that vitamin D deficiency reaches up to 90% in residential care settings, and even in community-dwelling older adults, the rates are high. After age 60, the skin produces less vitamin D from sunlight exposure. Dietary intake often falls short, and many people with deficiency have no symptoms they would connect to vitamin D. They simply feel a gradual weakening that they attribute to aging. A simple blood test measuring serum 25-hydroxy vitamin D can tell you whether your levels are adequate. If they are not, this is one of the most straightforward conversations to have with your doctor, and the evidence for its role in muscle function is solid enough to take seriously. The fourth hidden factor is insufficient protein intake, and specifically not getting enough protein distributed throughout the day to support muscle maintenance in aging legs. Research consistently shows that adults over 60 need more protein than the standard dietary guidelines recommend. While the common recommendation is 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight, researchers now generally recommend 1.0 to 1.2 grams per kilogram, sometimes higher for older adults trying to preserve muscle. And a 2025 study published in Frontiers in Nutrition confirmed that inadequate protein intake, combined with hormonal changes, reduced physical activity, and chronic inflammation, accelerates muscle loss and worsens the progression of sarcopenia in older adults. But the distribution of protein throughout the day matters just as much as the total amount. Muscle protein synthesis, the process by which the body repairs and builds muscle tissue, is stimulated most effectively by meals that contain around 25 to 30 grams of quality protein each. If most of a person's protein is consumed at dinner, the rest of the day runs in a deficit. The muscles, which are the body's largest protein reservoir, slowly lose mass over months and years, and the legs, as the largest muscle group in the body, show the effects most visibly. The practical correction is less about dramatic dietary overhaul and more about consistent adjustment. Protein at breakfast, protein at lunch, protein at dinner, eggs, Greek yogurt, cottage cheese, lean meat, fish, legumes, each meal anchored in protein. It is a simple framework, and the research supporting it for muscle preservation in older adults is now well established. The fifth hidden factor is something that almost everyone with weaker legs is doing more of, precisely because of those weaker legs, and it creates a cycle that is difficult to escape without understanding it. That factor is extended inactivity specifically. The compounding effect of reduced movement on the very muscles that need to be used. Here is how the cycle works. The legs begin to feel weaker or less reliable, so you sit more to avoid the discomfort or unsteadiness. But sitting more reduces the load placed on the leg muscles, which causes those muscles to lose strength and mass more quickly, which makes the legs feel weaker, which leads to more sitting. Round and round, each stage amplifying the next. Research confirms that strength loss after age 60 is not linear. Periodic bouts of reduced physical activity and muscle disuse transiently accelerate loss of muscle and declines in muscle strength beyond what aging alone would produce. A few weeks of significantly reduced activity, the kind that happens during illness, injury, or simply a stretch of difficult weather, can cost months of strength that is hard to get back. The solution is not heroic, it is consistent. Short walks, even 10 to 15 minutes, getting up and moving every hour rather than sitting for 3 or 4 hours without interruption. Gentle resistance exercises that challenge the leg muscles, sit to stand from a chair, slow step exercises, standing on one foot for balance. These are not gym workouts. They are the kind of movement that maintains the nerve-to-muscle signal, preserves the muscle mass, and keeps the blood flowing through the leg vasculature. They are also some of the most evidence-supported interventions for maintaining independence and reducing fall risk in older adults. The sixth hidden factor is one that connects to several of the others and often goes entirely unaddressed. That factor is chronic low-grade inflammation, what researchers sometimes call inflammaging, and its specific damaging effects on muscle tissue in aging legs. Inflammation is a normal and necessary part of the body's repair and defense system. But chronic, low-level inflammation, the kind that persists at a background level for years, has a documented destructive effect on muscle. It activates pathways in the body that break down muscle protein, interferes with muscle protein synthesis, impairs satellite cells that repair and regenerate muscle tissue, and contributes to the mitochondrial dysfunction in muscle fibers that makes them less efficient at producing energy. Research published in 2024 in Brain, Behavior, and Immunity Health found a direct, measurable relationship between elevated inflammatory markers, specifically IL-6, CRP, and TNF-alpha, and both fatigue and pain in older adults. These are precisely the markers that rise with a sedentary lifestyle, poor diet, disrupted sleep, and chronic psychological stress, all of which become more common after retirement and in later life. The 5 primary drivers of this chronic inflammatory state that matter most for leg health are ultra-processed food consumption, poor sleep quality, physical inactivity, gut microbiome imbalance, and chronic psychological stress. Each of these can be addressed through behavior. None of them requires medication, but recognizing them as active contributors to why your legs feel heavy, tire easily, and recover slowly is the first step toward addressing them with intention. Now we arrive at the final hidden factor, the one I mentioned at the beginning, the one that shows up consistently in research and that almost everyone over 60 is experiencing to some degree without knowing it is happening. The one that feels exactly like the inevitable weakness of aging, but often has an entirely different explanation. That factor is a decline in the nerve system's ability to fully activate the muscle that is already there. Let me explain what this means in plain terms, because it is genuinely important. When researchers study leg strength in older adults, they frequently find a specific pattern. The muscles appear to have a certain amount of tissue. But when those muscles are tested, the actual force they produce is significantly lower than what their size would predict. The gap between what the muscle should be capable of and what it actually produces is larger than in younger adults. And that gap is driven by what researchers call voluntary activation failure, the nervous system's inability to fully recruit and drive the muscle fibers it has. A research team at Ohio University, led by Dr. Brian Clark, found that weak elderly patients show significant disabilities in their nervous system that hinder the activation of their leg extensors, and identified multiple sites in the neuromuscular pathway that could be responsible from the motor neurons themselves to the descending drive from the brain. A 2025 systems-based model of neuromuscular decline described how the gradual loss of motor units, vital nerve-muscle connections, undermines movement control and coordination, and that this process is far more widespread and systemic than previously understood. What this means for someone over 60 is that their legs may be weaker not only because the muscle has shrunk, but because the brain and nervous system have partially lost the ability to fully use what muscle remains. And this is why people feel a kind of weakness and unsteadiness that is qualitatively different from simple tiredness, a sense that the legs do not quite respond the way they used to, that they feel uncertain even when the person is trying hard. The hopeful part of this finding is what the research says about reversibility. The neuromuscular system, like the muscle itself, responds to use. Challenging exercises that require genuine, focused effort, the kind that makes the nervous system recruit muscle fibers maximally, maintain and partially restore the neural drive to muscles. Balance exercises that force the nervous system to make rapid adjustments strengthen the pathways between brain and leg. Even exercise that simply requires a person to move with intention, focus, and effort has a different effect than passive movement because it is the intentional activation of the neural pathway that keeps it functional. This is why the research on resistance exercise for older adults consistently shows benefits that go beyond simple muscle size increases. The improvements in strength that people experience often exceed what would be predicted from the muscle mass changes alone. The nervous system is being retrained to fully use what is there. Let's bring this all together because understanding all of these factors simultaneously changes how you think about what your legs are telling you. The loss of the nerve to muscle signal begins around age 50 and accelerates if the muscles are not consistently challenged. Poor circulation reduces the oxygen delivery that leg muscles need to function well, and a sedentary lifestyle directly worsens the vascular health of the lower limbs. Vitamin D deficiency, which is widespread and underdiagnosed in older Americans, directly impairs muscle function at the cellular level. Insufficient protein distributed throughout the day deprives the muscles of the material they need to maintain their mass. Extended inactivity compounds all of these factors in a self-reinforcing cycle that accelerates faster than most people realize. Chronic inflammation degrades muscle tissue and impairs the repair processes that would otherwise compensate. And the nervous system's declining ability to fully activate existing muscle creates a weakness that feels like the muscle has given up, when in reality, the problem is partly in the signal, not just the receiver. None of these is something you were told about. None of them came with a warning. And for many people, recognizing them is genuinely the first step toward addressing them. The practical starting point is movement, daily movement that challenges the legs, not just walking, but standing, balancing, pushing, stepping, climbing. Consistent protein at every meal. A conversation with a physician about vitamin D levels and circulation if you have not had one recently. Reducing the amount of time spent sitting in long, unbroken stretches throughout the day. And taking chronic inflammation seriously by improving sleep, diet quality, and stress management. None of this requires a gym membership, an expensive program, or a perfect lifestyle. It requires consistency and an understanding of what your body actually needs, which is exactly what this channel exists to provide. This is the kind of information that belongs in front of as many people as possible, because leg weakness after 60 is often accepted as fate when it does not have to be. If this video gave you a different way of thinking about what your legs are telling you, I want to hear about it. Drop a comment below. Tell me which of these hidden factors surprised you most, or which one you think applies to your situation. I read every comment here, and your answers shape what we cover next. And if someone you know is dealing with this, a father, a neighbor, a brother, a friend who has been chalking up weak legs to just getting old, please share this video with them. You might be handing them the beginning of an answer they have been searching for. Subscribe to Longevity Insight if you have not already, and join us every week for content that takes your health seriously. Because aging well is not about luck, it is about knowing what to look for and what to do next. Take care of those legs. They have carried you a long way. They can carry you a long way still.